2, 3 seconds, please move away and go back to your territory, sir.
No.
As information, sir, you are in Indonesian waters.
China has an indisputable sovereignty over the island in South China Sea and the adjacent waters, and enjoys sovereign rights and jurisdiction in the relevant.
The United States will compete, and will compete vigorously, and lead with our values and our strength. We'll stand up for our allies and our friends, but we're not seeking, say it again, we are not seeking a new Cold War.
That wave is a good 15, 20 feet tall. Easy. Get in, get in, get in!
Just after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, 4 nations teamed up to deal with the fallout of the natural calamity that wreaked havoc in 14 countries and killed more than 220,000 people. India, Japan, Australia, and the United States formed a core group for relief efforts. By mid-January, the coalition had handed over charge to the United Nations. But it led to the birth of an informal alliance, the Quadrilateral.
The US in particular was unable to make the full pivot back to Asia. So they were looking for allies with whom to do some work. So Japan and Australia were already allies. But when the tsunami took place in 2004, the realization that the Indian Navy was a great power which could actually do good through humanitarian assistance and disaster relief in the region came upon them. So then this idea of confluence of the oceans and free and open Indo-Pacific were being talked about by various countries, but now the ambit included India. So I think the significance of Quad 1.0 is the inclusion of India in essentially a Japan-US outlook towards the Indo-Pacific.
Then Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's proposal to hold the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue kicked off in 2007. The initiative was meant to facilitate conversations and cooperation between the 4 maritime democracies in the context of building a free and open Indo-Pacific region. The Quadrilateral dialogue also saw joint military exercises on an unprecedented scale, an expanded version of the annual US-India Malabar exercise. The new grouping made China nervous, and it responded by registering formal protests with each of the Quad member countries. But the quadrilateral engagement was short-lived. It derailed following the unexpected withdrawal of Australia after a change of leadership. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd walked away from Quad, citing the growing tension between the United States and China in the Asia-Pacific. Critics also blamed Quad members for its lack of cohesion. But Beijing's extremely shrill reaction to four like-minded countries establishing a plurilateral platform reflected the idea's significance.
It was definitely a mistake. The government of the day, the Rudd government, was trying to avoid antagonizing China, and so therefore it didn't want to proceed with the Quad. And that was a huge mistake because it really didn't gain Australia anything. China has continued to emerge as a challenge and a threat, and now the Quad is a really important organization and grouping to counterbalance and deter the rise of China.
Quad 1.0 was eventually disbanded, but the spirit of alliance was reignited 10 years later.
In the missing decade of the Quad, Australia was trying to be like the European Union is today, trying to adjust with China. And I think the European Union perhaps still has to learn its lesson, but I think Australia has learned its lesson, that adjustment with China doesn't pay. And they have suffered economically a lot. So therefore, I think they have firmly committed themselves to the Quad.
Because I think the region recognized that China's stance had changed, particularly once President Xi Jinping came to power in Beijing. He shifted China in a new path. Previously, it could be summarized by Deng's bide your time, hide your strength, work with the international system. Xi has changed that. Xi has adopted a far more nationalist tone, a far more assertive posture on the international scene. That I think has everyone concerned. And so the Quad was necessary in order to respond to that far more assertive China.
Between 2007 and 2017, Quad members continued to cooperate with each other on a bilateral or trilateral level. In 2017, during the ASEAN summits in Manila, all four former members, led by Japan's President Abe, Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and US President Donald Trump, agreed to revive the Quadrilateral alliance in order to counter China militarily and diplomatically in the South China Sea.
A real enemy to glue us together, and which was the aggression of China, which becomes more palpable from 2012 in the South China Sea, and the utter helplessness of ASEAN towards China, and their inability to control the South China Sea, which means that India, Japan in particular, our trade would get impacted, our use of the South China Sea would get impacted. Therefore, we all become more vocal and start talking of the free and open seas, which ultimately becomes the free and open Indo-Pacific. So I think that is you need an enemy to deal with. So China is the unstated enemy because Quad documents never mention China, but they mention protecting everything which China is perceived to be trying to modulate.
The Navy chiefs of all four countries came together on a single forum during the Raisina Dialogue in New Delhi in 2018, one of the first indications of the revival of the Quad's security structure. In 2020, after a gap of 13 years, Australia finally rejoined the Trilateral Malabar Maritime Exercise that includes India, Japan, and the US. Last year, the exercise was conducted in 2 phases. This year, the 25th edition of the Malabar exercise began off the coast of Guam in the Pacific Ocean on August 26th. Malabar started off as a bilateral exercise between the navies of India and the United States in 1992. Japan joined the naval exercise in 2015 as a permanent member, and Malabar became a trilateral exercise. Australia participated in 2007 and then stopped when the government changed and the Quad disbanded. Its return is significant. The regrouping of 4 powerful navies has riled China, which is flexing its military power globally.
The rise of China, I think, is now a given. They are a very important economy. They have become a very important political force through their BRI and other engagements with the world. And now their navy is among the most powerful. They have rapidly expanded over the last decade into a 2-career navy with 2 task forces. That's a different matter that right now those navies are, task forces are looking at Taiwan. But in the South China Sea, the Chinese have taken over many islands and expanded them illegally. And now they have the capacity to have air force running out of there. Besides defensive missiles, offensive missiles, and air power, it is like, fixed aircraft carriers. So the Chinese have showed huge reach. Now, this power is not going to recede at least for the next 30 years. So what the Quad is trying to do is build a coalition of willing countries who are ready to take on China and keep the world a safe place for everybody to do business in.
The Quad's not going to go forward with a Quad exercise, but Malabar is a de facto Quad exercise. I mean, I think Beijing gets the point that the exercises demonstrate a willingness and a resolve among those 4 countries to work together on challenges of mutual concern to include China.
Let's look at the timeline of Quad 2.0. The Quad foreign ministers held their first meeting under the Quad framework in New York in September 2019. The second foreign ministers' meeting took place in Tokyo, with a focus on the COVID-19 pandemic. In March this year, the first ever virtual Quad summit was held, where members described a shared vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific and a rules-based maritime order in the East and South China Seas, which the Quad members state are needed to counter Chinese maritime claims. Will Quad 2.0 make an impact?
Quad 1.0 essentially was a very low-level discussion, and the discussions were far more cautious and incremental in nature. And as I said, both India and Australia had reasons to move slowly on that, and ultimately Australia was the one that walked away from Quad 1.0. Quad 2.0 is far more ambitious, far more determined to make rapid progress in a variety of areas, and recognises the strategic challenge posed by China and seeks to respond accordingly.
Well, it got rebooted, but if you see the Quad summit, so you take Quad 2.0, with essentially a quadrilateral security dialogue, which then becomes an exercise. But Quad 2.01 and 2.02, which is going to happen now, essentially these are going beyond security. They are amalgamating the kinds of agenda which the world today wants: connectivity, quality infrastructure, supply chain resilience. Now, there is the India, Australia, Japan, SCRI on this. Then now, of course, COVID. And related to COVID, there is vaccine production, there is distribution, there are supply chains, there is manufacturing, and you also have China challenging you on high-tech, 5G, 6G. So the idea was, how do you bring your resources together to make sure that Chinese do not dominate these new technologies, whether they be on electric vehicles or they be on 5G and vaccine diplomacy.
So it's not just security issues, but it's also things like climate change, which actually is increasingly a national security issue, but in and of itself is not. Pandemic relief, global supply chains, lots of other things that are on the table, which are very interesting that they're coming up in that forum, and I think that those countries can do a lot. One side note to that, of course, is that Japanese Prime Minister Suga is stepping down. And so let's not forget, last time the Quad had problems, it was mostly because of domestic political reasons and each of the four countries. And so I'll be looking very closely to see what happens after September, after the election in Japan.
And now, all eyes are on the first ever in-person Quad summit hosted by the United States on the 24th of September, which the Indian Prime Minister will be attending. Experts believe that India's renewed commitment to the Quad will have far-reaching impact.
And India, I think, has tried to maintain a sort of like a non-aligned or neutral position on the issue of China up until recently, when China has been making all sorts of aggressive moves along India's border with China in the Himalayas. I think India now has adopted a new posture vis-a-vis China, as has Australia. And so the political conditions now are ripe for the Quad to make progress. It's now much more forward-looking and active in the Quad, whereas back in the early days, India was far more reticent and concerned about not moving too fast. Now I think you're seeing India taking a leading role in the Quad, which is very good to see. And this is across the sort of the spectrum of Quad activities, including political and defence and critical and emerging technologies.
It's also expected to boost India's vaccine diplomacy. When the Quad leaders first held a virtual summit at the peak of the COVID-19 crisis in March, they committed themselves to supplying 1 billion COVID-19 shots across Asia by the end of 2022. The plan was to make US vaccines in India with Japanese funding and Australian logistical support for countries in the Indo-Pacific region. However, India was hit by a devastating second wave this summer, forcing the Indian government to halt all exports as it sought to vaccinate its own large population. Now the Indian Prime Minister has said they are ready to restart exports, and an Indian Foreign Ministry said the leaders are expected to lay out a more concrete plan on September 24th.
We are also ramping up production capacity of existing vaccines. As our production increases, we will be able to resume vaccine supply to others too.
US President Joe Biden, too, said that the Quad alliance will help India produce at least 1 billion vaccine doses to boost global supply by the end of 2022.
Our Quad partnership with India, Japan, and Australia is on track to help produce at least 1 billion vaccine doses in India to boost the global supply by the end of 2022.
And as far as the United States is concerned, it too has a lot to prove, especially after its humiliating Afghanistan exit.
One of the clear fallouts of the Afghanistan pullout by the Americans is that they will now be in the Indo-Pacific in a stronger way. A very simple example I'll give you, that in order to deal with Afghanistan evacuation, there were two carrier battle groups, one out of the Indo-Pacific and one out of San Diego, operating in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. Now, once Afghanistan is over for the Americans, unfortunately, it's not over for Afghanistan and us. They have moved those carrier battle groups back into the Indo-Pacific. So you will see a more robust American presence in the Indo-Pacific.
Washington needs other countries to get behind its push to check China's moves. But the question is, can it be trusted? And then there's the new AUKUS alliance. In a statement on September 15th, Australia, the UK and the US announced the formation of a Trilateral security pact, to be known by the acronym AUKUS. The sudden announcement has shaken up the political and security scenario in the Indo-Pacific, with many believing it can undermine the Quad. Announced just days before the Quad summit, the initiative will see Australia acquire nuclear-powered submarines with the help from the UK and the United States. The US decision to supply nuclear-powered submarines to Australia is a momentous one. It drew a strong reaction from France, which lost its submarine deal with Australia as a result. France has responded by recalling its ambassadors from Australia and the US. Does the new AUKUS grouping mean the US is pushing Quad to the back burner? And does it hold some lessons for India?
UK-US AUKUS has got two Quad members, just like the India-France-Australia Trilateral does. Except here, the shock has come because of the cancellation of the submarine deal with France, to which France has reacted in a very negative manner. But I think the United States has made it now more or less clear that if you want to be its allies and partners, they want to have the primary space in your defense purchases. So they say the same thing to India, they say the same thing to Japan, and now they're saying the same thing to Australia. Now, this hurts, but I think we should separate defense sales from strategic outlooks. So I think there will be a reaction for a while, but I do not think AUKUS is in any way diminishing the importance of Quad. If anything, it will strengthen Australia's defense capabilities, which, when augmented, will support the Quad in the Indo-Pacific.
AUKUS is one of the many strategic alignments being created in the Indo-Pacific region, a part of the geopolitical churn that the region has been witnessing for the past decade. And all these alignments and realignments will have strategic implications for India.
India, has talked favorably about AUKUS, but I also think that India has historically shown that it does not wish to push the envelope too much, because it does have to live right next to China. And right now, of course, has an ongoing land dispute with China, with military forces deployed in certain areas high in the Himalayas. And so that's, something that India definitely needs to consider. Also, India just the other day, embraced France, the spurned party in AUKUS. And those two countries share some similarities in their approach to international affairs. Both of them want to remain strategically autonomous. And so I think that maybe is kind of an alternate way of dealing with challenges in the Indo-Pacific. So there's a lot, like you said at the outset, there's a lot of churn going on, a lot of developments, and we're trying to connect the dots very quickly as things happen quickly.
Will the Quad manage to blunt Chinese aggression?
They have probably the best chance. Ideally, it would be good to bring in other states, not necessarily as part of the Quad, but certainly look at the Quad Plus as an entity. So bring in countries like South Korea, some of the ASEAN states, Canada, New Zealand, and work together to essentially assure a stable and secure, free and open Indo-Pacific region, and also an effective counterbalance capability to deter a rising China.
These four big players coming together represent a challenge to the effort by China to become the hegemon of the Indo-Pacific. So the significance is resist the rise of China in a way which is detrimental to the Indo-Pacific and the common good of people.